Two soldiers hold a girl by the arms, who is hanging helplessly. The ruler of the kingdom addresses her in an authoritative and respectful tone and accuses her of a crime, which she did not commit. He orders her to be brought up. The guards carry out their master's orders. They order the girl to kneel before the ruler and not to look at him under any circumstances. It was from this moment that her problems began. In a past life, the girl's problems and death began with the onset of a deadly pandemic. People were forbidden to leave their homes and quarantine was declared. One day, the girl did dare to go out into the street to the store. Carelessly crossing the road, the poor thing didn't notice a car flying straight at her. Neither the driver nor the girl had time to orient themselves. The main character died. She thought that it was the most senseless death when the message about a fatal disease was simply ignored, and you died from a car accident. The next place she opened her eyes was at the bottom of a deep well. The girl was panicking. She called out loudly for help, but no one heard her pleas. There was no one around. Gathering her strength, she finally climbed out of the trap. Now the girl was thinking about what kind of desert she had found herself in. After all, no one had even tried to come to her aid during her entire stay in the well. Her anxiety disappeared when the girl saw a crowd of people in front of her, shining torches. People were looking intently at the strange girl who somehow ended up in the well. As soon as she was on the ground, a barrage of questions rained down on the poor thing. Everyone was curious about how she had ended up there, and whether she was a spy for the enemies and had poisoned the spring. The girl immediately saw that the body she was in did not belong to her. She carefully examined herself in a puddle of water. Fear and despair began to take possession of her, but it was worth stopping the panic early. One of the men was watching the girl's reaction closely. He asked if she was crazy and what the last thing she remembered was. Everyone around was also curious about the name of the newly arrived stranger. But the girl was also worried that the people in the village were dressed strangely. They also spoke an incomprehensible language, but she understood them and could answer questions clearly. The poor thing thought that God had taken pity on her and given her a new chance, and that meant that she could start many things over again, and finally give herself a worthy name and start life again. The girl thought that in this way God could give her another chance to survive. In that case, she decided to come up with a really cool name for herself. So from now on, her name was Eminfiella, Ruse de Morsha. Those present were surprised. This name was very strange for their region. The man believed that the girl had hit her head very hard. From that time on, she was simply called Liffey. The locals said that a thief had thrown her into a well. Before that, he hit her hard on the head. Or she was immediately thrown into the well, and the girl hit the walls of the well at that moment. No one could say anything about this with any accuracy about the course of events. In general, it was no longer important. But the new life in the village was too boring for the girl. She wanted something more for herself. But one day, she did come across a very interesting story that she overheard. The guy said that His Highness saw his princess very often, so they could be preparing a wedding. One of the interlocutors said that Princess Regina was quite attractive. The girl could not believe her ears. The emperor and his princess were characters from her favorite book, a romance novel written for girls. The princess was the main character of the work. And here is her lover. Emperor Persilian was known as a bloody tyrant, so no one could even answer him a word and disturb his peace, but he was kind and gentle to his beloved, trying not to offend her. All of His Majesty's subjects and vassals believed that their couple was made in heaven. No one doubted that this union would culminate in a wedding and the formation of a new ruling dynasty that would conquer the continent. But the girl understood that they were a perfect couple only in her imagination. In reality, everything was a little different. Persilian was not the main character, and he was not even a secondary character, which was disappointing. Only the girl herself liked the storyline about Persilian and Regina's love, but the girl was still glad to have entered the world of her favorite novel. After all, now she knew what she would do. The newcomer ordered everyone present to line up in front of her. After all, it was in this case that she would be able to predict their future, and in this way she could confidently earn a living, which she did successfully. The girl could easily predict the future because she knew what the book was about. It was thanks to this that she became a prophetess. And in this case, she also saw her own future, in which she was rich. Rumors and gossip about the prophetess Liffey spread throughout the state. There were many who wanted to use her services, but before conquering the entire empire, she was brought to the emperor himself. The ruler ordered her to name herself. The girl obediently did so, after which His Highness asked her if she guessed what the essence of her accusation was. Liffey thought that it was no longer worth mentioning the Emperor's family. A child's voice asked the surprised Leaf how she intended to use the information she had. The girl thought that besides the Majesty and his knights, there was also someone else there. The prophetess suddenly saw the Emperor. She could not confuse his appearance with anyone else. The tyrant was known throughout the continent for his beautiful eyes and beauty, and also for his tough character. But what was her surprise when on the throne before her was a little boy, and not the formidable ruler of all lands. Persilian was still quite young at the moment when she found herself before his throne. The little one, without thinking twice, asked when he would be able to return to his normal state. He needed information about his future. Liffey tensed up. She was afraid to say the wrong thing. A knight stood next to His Highness. Liffey remembered that in the second part of the novel, the Lord had mysteriously disappeared somewhere. Perhaps this had something to do with the way he looked now. She was afraid to ask. The mystery was that the disappearance was related to where this character had disappeared to, and the girl thought that the reason was that he was an unpopular character and did not play an important role. Liffey was silent and thinking for too long. The Emperor ordered her to be killed. The knight was already drawing his weapon when the prophetess said that she was ready to reveal the secret of what had happened to His Highness the day before. The girl begged for mercy. In return, she would definitely learn how to deal with the curse that had been placed on him. Only this would take some time, His Highness thought. He didn't have many options. The boy held up his fingers. Liffey asked what that meant. She thought it meant days or months, but when Percy's fingers began to shrivel, she realized that it was a matter of precious seconds. The girl thought that the precious chance to live life again, given by God, could so easily disappear. Without thinking twice, she replied that the Emperor should always be by her side. Liffey said she had learned of a way to break the spell. They must be close. But as for who had cast it on the Emperor, there was no certainty about that. His Majesty asked how she knew where the curse came from. The girl replied that the ruler had many enemies, and this was definitely one of them. Someone dared to engage in dark magic against the ruler. The knight next to Percy said that, in fact, many of the aristocracy had begun to behave strangely. It was possible that the prophetess was actually right. The Emperor praised his servant for his insight and observation. Liffey was delighted. A moment ago she had thought that His Majesty was a very scary and dangerous person, but in reality, everything was not as scary as it should have been. She advised Percy to stay by her side and save her life. But the boy was not as simple as the girl thought he was. He asked if she really expected him to believe such nonsense. After all, she had told him all this to save her own life. Now Percy asked how she could prove her words were true. She replied that of all the possible options, he had chosen to meet her. He certainly wouldn't have come up with such a decision himself. His Majesty was surprised. In fact, the decision to turn to the sorceress was prompted by his advisor. He considered all possible options, which could help the ruler return to normal. And precisely because even the priests could not cure him or solve the problem, the man advised him to turn to the prophetess, whose fame spread throughout the lands around the ruler's palace. The girl carefully watched His Highness's reaction. She knew for sure that she should consolidate her current success, so she said that she knew about what had happened between him and the princess about a month ago. Liffey told how, before boarding the ship, Princess Regina received a bracelet as a gift from the Emperor. It was a creation of Percy himself, which he had made with his own hands for the gift. And the princess gave him cufflinks in return. The prophetess herself could not think why she had not used this argument before, but she justified herself by saying that she did not want to talk about the Emperor's personal life. The meeting between the ruler and the princess was very secret. Now it was impossible to talk about it openly. Only the knight who constantly protected His Highness from danger and enjoyed his trust knew about it. However, he could not hear the conversation itself, but the princess's gift became very important and symbolic for Percy. He was even afraid to use them because he was afraid of breaking them or damaging them. The girl also knew that the princess had happily accepted his gift, pointing out the similarity of the flowers to His Majesty's eyes. After that, Liffey was about to tell something more from the conversation, but Percy stopped her. The prophetess guessed that he was afraid of the moment when she would tell him about the proposal to marry him immediately. This was their last meeting, after which a strange metamorphosis occurred with the ruler of the state. Hopchick was amazed that the girl described the moment of his meeting with her lover in such detail. She replied that her predictions usually come true with great accuracy, so it's worth believing this time too. Luffy added that she had a clear picture in her head at such moments. Percy smiled. This smile could be interpreted in many ways, so you shouldn't immediately believe the tyrant and relax. His Majesty replied that he would keep his word. He would keep her with him. However, it so happens that he is interested in the time frame in which he will become ordinary and return to his ordinary body. The Emperor advised her not to try to deceive him. If his stay in the boy's body lasted too long, he would punish the liar, and then her life would become truly dark and miserable and unworthy. The girl was glad that she had survived. She had been thinking about her death since she had first entered the palace. However, miraculously, and thanks to her ingenuity, she survived and brought the Emperor closer to her for a while. The knight told Luffy that she was the second person to know about His Highness's terrible secret. No one else knew about his secret and unexpected changes, so it's worth keeping quiet and watching your tongue. The girl was given a room next to His Majesty's chambers. Millard told the girl what she should do and whom she should obey in order not to harm His Majesty or put him in danger. The man also said that the Emperor had been in this condition for about 10 days. Neither the priests nor the magicians could help him. The doctors also threw up their hands when they heard about such a case, so he was really afraid. Everyone who visited the Emperor drank a potion that erased their memory for the next 2 hours, and no one remembered anything. If someone didn't want to do this, they simply had it poured down their throats and forced them to swallow. Many wizards of the Eckhart Empire were not allowed into the palace of the ruler. The reason for this was the old and already forgotten enmity between the rulers and the magicians. The situation with this was very complicated and had its roots in the past. The main reason was that the boy knew how to use magic. He was called the best wizard in the empire, so he couldn't let other wizards treat him and help him with his illness. All the wizards lived in a magic tower. The tower itself belonged to Archduchess Dipk, and it was she who was the main suspect in what happened to the little lord. Ever since Percy was like this, he could not use magic. It seemed that he had actually returned to his 4-year-old self and had forgotten how to use magic and his abilities. That girl reassured Millard. After all, she would not allow misfortune to happen. She agreed with His Majesty's knight that the prime suspect would be Archduchess Dipka. It was she who could be guilty of this attempt on the Emperor and his life. Millard said that they are now trying to sort out all matters without His Majesty's participation. But the abrupt cancellation of all ceremonial events could cause panic and some anxiety among the nobility and aristocracy. Moreover, even the servants have not been allowed to see the Emperor for the last 10 days. Everyone knows very well about the number of the Emperor's enemies. The reason for this was the disruption of the ceremony of his accession to the throne of the ruler. Perseus once killed his brothers and sisters in order to become emperor. This massacre could not be hidden from the people. But something else happened that was much more terrible than the previous one. The former emperor had a heart attack while talking to Percy, and blood gushed from his throat. This death also caused many rumors and stories. That is why it was said that the throne under Percy was soaked in blood. Millard said that the emperor believed that there must have been some clue in the palace that would have revealed this secret. The curse had been placed recently, and something or object might have been hidden in the palace. The knight asked if the girl felt anything right now. She realized that it was time to fantasize and turn on her acting skills and show that she was indeed looking for something and guessing about the reasons. His Majesty's servant explained that he had announced that the ruler had taken a long vacation. During this time, the prophetess needed to find the reason why such a misfortune had happened to the ruler and help. Luffy, the knight, and the emperor understood that a secret quest had arisen between them, which needed to be solved and the cause of the disease discovered. They found a secret hiding place for Percy. It was a bit abandoned. It was the former garden of the imperial palace. Percy kicked over a flower pot. The girl asked what had happened. He replied that it was just ordinary curiosity. Luffy said that everything had been inspected. The prophetess remembered that she could help him. But now it turned out that she would have to rely on her own abilities to solve the mystery, which, of course, could not happen. The conspiracy bucket was distracted by something. It sounded like someone was approaching them. They couldn't let anyone see His Majesty like this. Millard said he would detain the unwanted guest. Luffy at the last moment rushed to the little one and tried to cover him with her cloak so that no one could see him. The knight asked who dared to come here without permission and an invitation to the garden. A woman dressed in dark clothes came out to the audience. She said she heard a loud noise and thought someone was trying to destroy the greenhouse. But this could not be allowed. It was built by Philip himself. Liffey recognized the Archduchess. Only one person could bear that title, and she was the sister of the late emperor. Her name was Diepke von Dideus. She could not believe that such a thing could be allowed to happen. The once majestic greenhouse, the winter decoration of the palace, was brought to this state. Neglect and unwillingness to do anything with it all reigned around. The imperial family had been growing plants in this place for many years. Count Hadat proposed immediately after the walk to convene a meeting of the nobles and aristocracy in order to express a note of protest to the great emperor and call him to account for his inaction. The woman replied that gossip about His Majesty's busyness had already spread throughout the empire. So it's not worth distracting the ruler from important matters. The guy doesn't even leave the palace walls. It seems that he is solving important matters. The Archduchess believed that the emperor deserved to take a vacation for his efforts and work. So there was no point in distracting him now. But she still didn't trust the girl very much and considered her guilty. She still believed that Liffey might have come here specifically to destroy the greenhouse built by Brother Diepke. And for this, the woman didn't even know who to turn to with complaints and requests. The emperor's sister asked what the stranger's name was and what she had forgotten in this place with the emperor's loyal knight. Silence reigned. The woman saw the broken flower pot and became angry. She asked who had done that to the flower. Liffey replied that if anyone should be punished, it was her. The Archduchess asked if she was really prepared to accept punishment for such a concession. Hadat asked if he was really the same prophetess everyone was talking about. Diepke was interested. She was definitely tense, but she didn't want to show it to those around her. She didn't like Liffey's company. Meanwhile, the man was telling her that the prophetess's fame was spreading throughout the empire. She had more than once predicted who would win in the palace competitions. But she spoke only the truth about future events. The Archduchess wondered what the girl was doing in the emperor's palace in that case. And why was she hiding the child behind her back? After all, this was definitely not her younger brother. The guards would not have allowed this to happen. The girl was already trying to think of something to answer on the fly, but someone's hand fell on her shoulder. It was Percy. He began to guess something when the Archduchess was nervous. The emperor had no time to act. The Archduchess did not expect to see a boy in such a place. She felt as if she had seen a ghost, but he did not show his face. Something strange flashed in her eyes, and in an instant it disappeared. The woman carefully watched what would happen next. The emperor and the Archduchess's gazes met. She looked intently at the little one. Liffey noticed something suspicious in Diepke's eyes. She was ready to pounce on the boy, but restrained herself with all her might. Suddenly, Percy threw himself into the hem of the girl's dress. He began to pretend, as if he was crying and complaining that this strange woman was scaring him. He did not want to be near her and be in the same room with her. Liffey guessed that Diepke did not recognize the emperor, but it remained a mystery what to do right now. After all, some time would pass, and the Archduchess would see in the little one the bloody tyrant she knew. Hadat intervened in the conversation. It was he who expressed the opinion that the boy was very similar to His Majesty. The man continued to say that even the color of the eyes of the little one and the emperor was exactly the same. Hadat still continued to look at the little one. Well, Liffey couldn't think of anything better than to say that this was the emperor's child. The servant was skeptical about this because His Majesty hadn't even had a wedding. The Archduchess received this news without any excitement. She was not happy about what she heard. The girl replied that it was Liffey who had been placed with the boy to serve him and do his will. Diepke began to analyze the gossip. None of them contained information that the emperor had an affair with anyone on the side. The only time he was out of the spotlight was when he was on vacation last time. Liffey said that the child's mother was dead. The emperor himself had given the order to kill her, and no one could manipulate him anymore. Hada seemed to guess that this could have happened 10 days ago, when Percy disappeared from society. Diepke asked if the emperor had taken a leave of absence to visit his ex's grave, and at the same time take with him a child he was absolutely certain was the father of. She still couldn't believe it. The girl was glad that her lie had grown by itself with so many facts and conjectures. It seemed that everyone around her believed her words, and there was no longer any doubt that it was the emperor's son who was now lying on her lap. Diepke asked if the little one would be raised in the palace. Liffey replied that his father would say so. The girl thought it was not worth continuing the conversation, because the Archduchess would guess something. The Archduchess asked if the girl was willing to take on the task of raising this little one so that he would grow up to be a normal person. Liffey agreed. She intended to protect the little one to the last. The girl took the little one in her arms. She asked him not to resist. But he was angry because Liffey had lied about his son. Now gossip would spread throughout all his lands, and he would only be able to dream about the princess. The Archduchess asked what the child's name was. The question caught the girl by surprise. The girl replied that the little one's name was Perry. That was the name the boy had been given by his father, who loved the little one very much and missed him very much. Liffey was glad that her lie was starting to come true. Now it was time to finish the conversation with Dipke because you could say a lot to the poor thing and get into a difficult situation. But the Archduchess was not so sure of her position regarding this little one. So she bowed to the girl and the boy and replied that she would soon visit His Majesty's son again with gifts. Finally, the woman advised to be strong and firm in their decisions. After all, weak people cannot survive in this place. She knew this from her own experience. The events of the past left an imprint on her feelings. Milord noticed how his master leaned even closer to the prophetess. The knight admitted that the little one liked being in the girl's arms. He certainly did not expect the emperor to behave like this with a stranger. But the knight was already starting to get nervous. He couldn't even imagine what the girl's lie about His Imperial Majesty's child could lead to, but she assured him that she didn't see any problems in the future because of it. The little one didn't miss the opportunity to say in a funny accent that he had also learned something from such a skilled prophetess. It was he who had come up with the image of her having her throat cut in the future. Liffey understood the hint at once. She decided not to joke like that again, so as not to expose herself to the wrath and displeasure of His Majesty. Although he was in the body of a boy, he remained what he had been before. Percy looked closely at his new guardian and said that he was actually very interested in seeing the future and what would happen there. Liffey tried to remember the plot of the book, but her memory was failing her. Viscount Yorser was sitting in his estate. He asked if the Archduchess had seen the prince yet. The man seemed to be very happy for some reason. The assistant confirmed the master's guesses. It happened in the palace's orangery. The man was shocked by this. After all, the emperor had categorically forbidden visiting that place. However, permission for something like this indicated that His Majesty allowed his son a lot and favored him. The emperor's palace was now growing larger every day. More and more nobles were arriving every day. They even tried to manage the affairs of state in a certain way while the emperor was away. And it was at this moment that the prince appeared. No one had even suspected his existence before. The boy was supposed to live somewhere outside the palace, and now all attention was focused on his person and the mystery of his appearance. The aristocrat decided that the best choice now was to be with the little one constantly and help and develop him in every way. After all, the emperor had left the boy incredible powers regarding governance. And this only meant that the heir from the beloved woman was to become the only contender for the ruler's throne in the event of any disturbances. The ruler turned out to be not such a cruel tyrant. It was hard to imagine, but he was also capable of tender feelings for someone. The truth of this was the child from his beloved girl. However, her fate remains a mystery to this day. Viscount Yorser was sure that he had to influence the little one in order to get some of the blame from him. It was on his attitude that he would rule the empire, and to what extent it would be possible. The man asked the assistant what the children liked to do these days. The assistant replied that the child had been living outside the palace all this time, so the boy might like something extraordinary and unusual. The assistant held out an object wrapped in a handkerchief. He was sure that the little one would like this object. Yorser smiled with pleasure and praised the servant for the correctness of his thoughts. In his palace 5 days later, the little duke was sitting in his room. Behind him stood Liffey, who from now on accompanied the little tyrant everywhere. In front of the prince stood a man, handing him a gift. Yorser was surprised when the boy looked at the gift skeptically and threw it with force very far away. He clearly did not like the aristocrat's gift. He began to get nervous and worry about his fate. Liffey decided to soften the situation. She told the Viscount that Perry had been receiving a lot of such gifts lately, so Yorser shouldn't be angry with the little guy for his prank. He was just fed up with it. The girl advised him to bring a toy decorated with a pink diamond next time. The boy would definitely like it, and then he would want to play with the nobleman and show his affection for him in the future. The Viscount was surprised. The pink diamond was very expensive. But the girl emphasized that such a thing would greatly surprise and delight the young prince. So the man had no choice but to agree. Perry overheard the conversation. He asked if the prophetess had decided to profit from his misfortune in this way. After all, he would be brought idiotic toys, and she would receive precious metals and jewelry in return. The tyrant also hinted that it was necessary to speed up the search for a solution to his problem. For the thought was beginning to creep into his mind that it would be much better for Liffey not to look for the reasons for his curse, but to leave it as it is. The girl replied that she had not even thought of anything like that. So now she would simply behave naturally and do nothing but look for the cause and culprit of the state the emperor was in. The little guy didn't even yell at her. The girl realized that he was too tired and exhausted by what was happening. She even felt sorry for him. After all, the man had ended up in such a stupid situation only because of his impudence. Liffey remembered the conversation she had had with the prince after that meeting in the conservatory. He had lashed out at her, saying he had been sending signals to the girl to stop talking nonsense. Then he explained that he tried to persuade her with gestures to call him not His Majesty's son, but her younger brother. The girl explained that she could not do this because they did not look at all alike. So Persilian decided to take his anger out on her until she came up with something sensible. But to her surprise, everything around her began to improve and become more pleasant for her. In the palace, too, everyone did not pay much attention to the sudden appearance of their ruler's son, but around the servants were talking about how different the rich are. After all, the son did not look like his father. The little one was very kind and polite. The prince was very similar in appearance to the emperor. The girl was glad of the fact that none of the servants remembered what His Majesty was like in childhood. Otherwise, their plan would have failed from the very beginning. To make matters worse, Liffey told the servants how much the young master missed his father, so they allowed him to spend the night in his father's room until his return. The boy was delighted and thanked them. But still, in the morning, a lot of nobles and aristocrats came to the emperor. They seemed to be drawn here by an invisible magnet. Until that moment, everything was fine. But the excessively intrusive guests did not give peace. Persilian more and more every day. People began to whisper that the prince had an unenviable role in all this. He was the fruit of the love between the emperor and his wife. However, his wife was very nervous at the time and worried that his enemies and political opponents might do something to the tyrant's child. That's why she hid him away from the palace, and then the prophetess Liffey witnessed his mother's death. It was she who took the little boy under her care, who grew up to be a real handsome man and was like 2 drops of water poured into his father. But one day Liffey could not stand it and brought the little one to the palace. This story was told by the servants and guests of the palace. In fact, the reason for their appearance in this place was completely different, and with her silence, she only fanned the fire. The girl asked the emperor if he didn't feel better now that he wasn't forced to hide from everyone and was in his room, albeit not in his usual form. He replied that he wasn't exactly. Now, thanks to her efforts, he had a son. He also had a lover, whom he had failed to follow and protect or help if she needed anything. This was doing him a disservice. Liffey noticed a change in the boy's character, but she wasn't sure if it was because of Princess Regina, but now there was no doubt about it. When it came to the princess, the emperor became very sweet. His Majesty did not want to talk about it. He believed that he and Meryl had had a very similar childhood, so he could understand her like no one else. That was the reason for such a deep feeling. Liffey asked if His Majesty thought the princess might be able to help him solve the curse. He asked that the child not be involved in their story. The girl felt funny at the way it was said. Percy asked if such a great prophetess could not solve his problem before the princess returned from her journey. He assured him that if that happened, her neck would float away separately from her body on a beautiful boat. The prince received a message from the Archduchess. This message said that the woman would conduct his welcoming ceremony. A mute silence reigned in the room. The girl was embarrassed by such attention to the child. The aide said that His Majesty should increase his escort. The aide assured him that he relied entirely on Millard's skill and did not need outside help. But the knight could not calm down. He emphasized that the little prince should not behave like the emperor from now on. He should be much more careful. The knight explained that he was concerned about the fate of the little lord, and therefore there would be little protection. The boy understood that due to the unexpected announcement of the ceremony, many people in the palace were very busy. This also applied to Millard, who was in charge of the security of the entire palace and its protection from unwanted guests. At one time, Persilian was considered the best magician, and he was able to survive even though many wanted to destroy him and overthrow him from the throne of the ruler of the empire. Many nobles thought about this very thing, but they did not succeed. But now the boy was the defenseless, unloved 4-year-old son of a ruler. His talent for magic had not even awakened. That was what Millard worried about the most, and so he worried about protecting him. Thus, it was worth increasing the escort as the guard demanded. But the problem was that the emperor did not trust people. He was very suspicious, and he was frightened by the presence of strangers nearby. Especially when he was in the body of a child who couldn't even fight back if someone attacked him. That's why he didn't want anyone around, even if it was his escort guards or assistants. The girl promised that she would personally take care of her master's protection. However, a situation has now arisen where no one can be allowed close to the son of His Majesty Emperor Persian. However, Liffey advised her to bring to her the knights who would be willing to protect the heir to the throne. In this way, she would select the right people for her group of guards. She was confident that she would find loyal knights. But the girl was also scared. After all, if something terrible happened to the prince, she would be the only one to blame. It was a huge responsibility to keep His Highness's safety under personal control. There was a document that stated that many powers had been transferred to him. Many of the aristocrats and even the common people were not happy about this. But no one could say anything yet. Everyone was worried that the little one had grown up outside the palace, had not received a proper upbringing. But now it so happened that this man had taken power in a huge state. But until the noble assembly, everyone was silent. It was during the ceremony that all the discontented were supposed to unite and express their protest against what was happening. The prince seemed to foresee this and therefore limited the number of visitors to his palace. So Deepka understood that all the aristocrats and nobles would be pleased to be invited to the ceremony that the Archduchess would host. So she would get satisfaction from what she had planned and moral peace of mind. On this occasion, she decided to organize not just a ceremony but a whole holiday for all the people of the empire. Guests from all over the state should arrive there, and it is here that everyone will hear the position of the ruling classes regarding the prince. The real meaning of this was that the aristocrats would try to take possession of the young prince in order to gain influence and become powerful in their lands and the lands of the empire. Deepki treated. The girl suspected something, but at the moment it was very difficult to influence the plans of a great and influential person who had once almost ruled an empire. For now, Liffey would focus on the task at hand. A designer was called in for the ceremony. The woman ran around the young prince, choosing the best combination of color and shape, but almost anything suited the little one. Liffey was pleased that so many people were trying for her master. So far, everything was going according to plan. The girl had organized everything, and many people asked her opinion because she had been with the prince most of the time. Many considered her his guardian and mentor. The girl constantly emphasized that being nice is the greatest weapon for a person. This is what misleads enemies and all enemies with their plans. The guy didn't like it very much. However, there was nothing he could do at the moment. All he could do was rely on his assistant. But suddenly, he noticed that people around him began to treat him better. Many said that the prince was just a copy of his father. Some also believed that if angels existed, they would definitely look like this. But the boy did not like that people around him saw him as some kind of doll. Liffey helped to dress the little boy nicely, but he was constantly dissatisfied and threatened to kill her if she didn't stop doing whatever she wanted to him. Percy kept pointing out that Liffey had strayed from her primary task. What she was doing now was far from predicting the future and resolving its curse. The girl emphasized that he needed to create a very cute image. After all, it turned out that she was forced to protect him now. And a cute and friendly appearance was the best weapon at this stage. Often, people want to protect what they find cute as much as possible. The same instinct existed in animals as well. Therefore, some of the aristocracy may change their minds about standing up to this young ruler. The girl explained that now they would open a real hunt for him. After all, many people simply wanted to take possession of him in order to further manipulate and use his influence and power. The prince was angry. He ordered them to leave. After all, Liffey's words angered him. He didn't even want to hear about such things. Although he understood perfectly well that she was saying the right things, and there was a lot of truth and sincerity in her words towards him. The prophetess begged her forgiveness, but it so happened that she had graduated from the Faculty of Political Science at one time, so she knew what she was talking about. Percy was still angry, but the girl noticed that he had become like a little kitten. Liffey wondered who had brought the beautiful jewelry for His Highness. After all, even setting aside his current status as a prince, the little one was very handsome and had a rather pleasant appearance. The prophetess was delighted. The girl invited an assistant for herself. She immediately felt a certain closeness to this servant, but she could not understand what was really happening between them. The prince drove them both away. He wanted to be alone. The evening of the ceremony came, and a great many guests had gathered. The hall was in a state of uproar. Everyone was waiting for the appearance of the young tyrant. Some believed that the fate of the empire would be decided today. Everyone present awaited the results. Liffey looked at it all and felt as if she were going blind. The servants had cleaned and decorated everything so beautifully over the past 10 days. It seemed as if this was not a welcoming ceremony, but Percy's accession to the throne. Among the guests were various people. There were both open enemies of the emperor himself and loyal servants of His Majesty. It is scary to imagine what could happen now in this hall. So far, nothing indicated any problems. The emperor's loyal subjects came here, only to make sure that everything was in order. And now it is necessary to give them all a sign that the emperor's power has not diminished. On the contrary, even his son is welcomed as ruler. The girl, meanwhile, said that His Highness might find new loyal subjects at this dinner. Some of the nobles still haven't decided whose side to take, so we need to focus on that. The emperor was a perpetual loner. The only one who could overcome his desire for solitude was Princess Regina. However, as it turned out, even she could not overcome his pathological fear of others. Liffey explained that if he found allies, their search for the culprit of the curse would be many times more productive. At the moment, the circle of suspects is too large. It needs to be narrowed down to a smaller number of people. One of those present turned to the prince. The man said that a gift had been prepared for Percy today. His Highness replied that there was no occasion for gifts today. After all, it was not his birthday. The prince said that he did not want to accept gifts, because it placed new demands on him from other people. It was somehow uncomfortable that he could not do anything about these people. But there was no other way out. The girl admired this character. At the age of 21, he became the emperor and ruler of the state. It was then that he began to be responsible for the future of his people and correspond to the status of a ruler. The Archduchess was making her way to the throne. She wanted to bow to the prince and congratulate him. In reality, her motives were less benign, but that would come later. Right now, she wanted to instill confidence in the little one. Usually the prince didn't need helpers. He did everything perfectly well by himself, but at this point he was only 4 years old. He never asked anyone for help, but what happened happened. Now, Dipka clearly claimed the role of the ruler's chief assistant, and everyone else had to be silent when she approached Percy. And if that didn't happen, she would raise a rebellion against His Highness. The woman had said that the child must feel bad about losing its mother, and right now Percy definitely wanted to get advice and care from someone. But the girl next to him couldn't do it fully. Deepki emphasized that the boy could turn to her for help as long as his father was not around. She was ready to come to his aid. After all, they were in a way relatives and not strangers. Percy remembered that in a way the woman was like a grandmother to him. But that was definitely not the case now. He tried his best not to lash out at her prematurely and anger her. But suddenly, unexpectedly, the boy replied that he wasn't going to rely on anyone. After all, his father had often told him that his aunt had recommended that he handle everything on his own if he wanted to be strong. Liffey didn't expect the boy to openly confront the Archduchess, and he told her about conversations with his father, who constantly advised him not to trust anyone, but to rely only on himself. The girl was nervous, but luckily her grandmother said she hoped her granddaughter would be okay. The Archduchess left, and Liffey was finally able to relax. Percy clearly liked that. Liffey noticed Sir Millard talking to a man she didn't know. The knight's interlocutor was clearly upset about something. Percy waited for the stranger to explain what had happened. Perhaps he could help. Millard said that the stranger was a knight of the escort. However, now he has injured his leg and can no longer perform his duties. The man was embarrassed to tell about it, but he can no longer protect the prince. But suddenly, the young man spoke to the prince himself. The knight asked to be allowed to guard the nobleman, but Percy said that he had noticed how the knight had changed his weapons. Since the morning they had been different, older, and less decorated. The prince looked intently at his guard and allowed the young man to begin his duty to the aristocrat. Now a new petitioner or guest, seeking an audience, would burst in upon Percy. The man fell to his knees before the throne and began to talk about how much he felt sorry for the boy who had grown up without a mother and suffered for many years without his father, who did not dare to take the child for himself. Unexpectedly, the guest, whose name was Viscount Gumover, said that the boy could call him father if he wanted to. Liffey didn't even want to think about how she would punish the crazy Percy, who was angry. The girl thought that she had not heard the Viscount's name, so he was one of those who would live their lives just like that. And then he would die in his estate, and only his children and relatives would remember him. The man continued, as if he didn't realize that he had said too much, but now he was carried away. He said that he had also grown up without a father, and he understood the little boy's condition perfectly. The guests were worried that Percy would kill him right now. But the boy let the man go. He simply ordered him to leave the estate. The guests nearby thought that the prince was much kinder than his father, who would have ordered the impudent man and his family to be killed. The boy ordered the sword to be handed to him. The little boy had difficulty carrying the weapon, but he still walked confidently to the steps from the throne. Millard wanted to help his master, but he simply chased him away. Percy threw his sword at the Viscount. The ruler ordered the nobleman to cut off his own head. Liffey wondered if she should interfere, although she really wanted to laugh, but this could not be allowed. The nobles around him thought they were jumping to conclusions too quickly. They were saying that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and that a son was worthy of his father. The little one couldn't bear to hear such things said in his presence. The servant begged him to forgive and have mercy. The little one said that if he had thought about his life, he would not have dared to say such vile things in front of all the guests present. Liffey thought that it was wrong to do so. The girl approached the prince and said that it was not right to do such a thing on a day when everyone was celebrating the return of the son of their powerful lord. Percy said that he was angry at the things they said about Persilio. The prophetess replied that the Viscount had indeed spoken very rudely. But this man had never been distinguished by a particularly sharp mind, as everyone around him said, but one should not be so rude in front of guests. Liffey pleaded for mercy for the man, and Percy was to be magnanimous towards his subject, who simply wanted to please his master. The prophetess suggested something to His Highness as an alternative. The little one told the frightened Viscount that from now on the man should say the words "haw haw" at the end of every sentence, so that everyone would understand that he was always talking nonsense. And now was the time to start talking like that. While the Viscount was silent, the boy looked meaningfully at the sword and said that if the Viscount did not need the head, then the knights would be happy to do the dirty work for their master. Now came the decisive moment. The man started barking. The boy was amused, but barking was not very appealing to him. So he came up with something more interesting for his idol. The Viscount was glad that he would not have to bark and make sounds anymore. The prince said that the barking would change to the sounds of ugh, ugh. So if the Viscount stopped saying that, then every subject was to report it, and whoever remained silent or defended the poor fellow would regret it. The ruler said he wanted to go out onto the balcony and take a break from all this masquerade. He was tired of watching his once loyal vassals start dancing in front of the tyrant's son. The girl asked if she should leave her master alone. He replied that he should stay. After all, in that case, a lot of aristocrats would come running to him again, and they would humiliate him again. The prophetess asked in surprise if the emperor really cared about her, but he replied that he simply did not trust the girl, and therefore he could not let her go, lest she say anything unnecessary. The guardian began to speak of her loyalty and devotion, but the boy stopped her. He reminded her that not long ago he had tried to punish her by cutting off her head, or by some other means to put her to death. The poor girl replied that if the aristocracy and nobles caught her right now, she would tell everything right away. These words made the little lord think about how he treated the girl. The prophetess was thinking at this time that today's incident at the ceremony had surprised her greatly. After all, many nobles had openly shown their dislike for the prince. After all, he had behaved like a father. And that was very dangerous now. After all, the emperor could afford such tricks when he possessed magical power and was a dangerous opponent. And now the little one could only muster 2 soldiers. The girl thought about how difficult it was to be weak and try to keep the nobles and aristocracy in submission, who had not been very loyal and sympathetic to the ruler and tyrant before. The prince replied that the girl herself could solve his problem if she could tell him right now how to get back to his usual appearance. But now she is doing nothing. In general, the boy was really very tired. He had the mind of a grown man, but the boy's body could not withstand such loads. The prince himself understood this perfectly well, and could not accept it. The girl assured him that everyone would understand when the young prince left his guests, because he was really tired and needed to rest. The prince scolded the girl and said that he shouldn't be told. Perry thought that the girl was being too harsh on him. After all, he could handle it on his own, without her help, but she was being too condescending, so he had to refuse her help. The boy suddenly saw the sword on his guard's side begin to shine brightly. Leafy and the knight were surprised, but suddenly they realized that this was a prepared attack on the ruler and the prince. There was a loud explosion. The girl grabbed the little boy and covered him with her body. Both fell heavily to the floor. The boy didn't even realize what had happened. It only started to dawn on him later. Percy was getting up from the floor. He was screaming loudly and calling for help. The boy was scolding the girl for her rash actions. After all, it seemed that she was tired of living, and she did it on purpose. Percy began to wipe and treat the wounds of his caretaker. The girl began to say that she was in pain, to which the boy advised to be more careful next time, but his movements were soft and gentle. Millard hurried with the report. He reported that a precious stone in the guard's sword had exploded. The young man died suddenly without even realizing what had happened to him. Someone had switched the boy's weapon. The unknown person tried to assassinate the prince. It was believed that the prince would like the weapon so much that he would keep the sword for himself. But since it was too heavy for him, Percy refused. The girl was surprised by the calmness with which the emperor himself reacted to the attempt against him. It seemed that he was already accustomed to constant danger and threats to his life. The tyrant had many enemies. Percy now asked the girl, who had not yet come to her senses after everything that had happened, why she had rushed to his rescue. After all, she was actually in the role of a captive next to him. In her place, everyone would have had a chance to escape or save their lives, but her self-sacrifice really surprised the little boy, and the girl replied that she saw His Highness alive and unharmed in the future. In that case, he could have come to her, and then calmly cut off her head or tortured her, and then destroyed her. In any case, she did it not out of good intentions, but out of calculation. She also figured that she would be less likely to be injured by the explosion, so she decided it was best to do it this way. Percy thanked her, but joked that it would be better if her mouth was injured. Finally, the evening was over. After the explosion, chaos reigned around. Everyone present was questioned, and the injured were given the necessary medical care. The magicians examined the scene but found nothing. For greater security, they decided to place soldiers and guards around the prince's residence. That night, everyone was tense and very suspicious. No one could sleep in the castle. Leafy came to His Highness with a proposal to sleep together. He did not expect such a turn of events. The girl explained that the culprit had not been found, and the prince was still in danger, so it was better together. Percy was furious that he was being talked about like a little child. Leafy added that in any case she could grab him in her arms and take him with her, saving him. Sir Millard agreed, but the prince replied that no one had asked him about it. So it was worth considering the proposal, although he knew very well that he would not agree to anything like that. The prince tried to drive her away, but the girl assured him that she would stay with him no matter what. After all, a few hours ago it was she who saved him when the attacker's attempt failed, and she was sure that the prince would always save her. After the explosion, he ordered the magicians who arrived at the palace to immediately deal with Leafy's wounds, and not with the search for the culprit of the attempt on the tyrant. After that, all three wizards treated her and provided assistance. The girl was not badly hurt, but it was very good that she recovered so quickly. But Percy said that she might not be so lucky again. Leafy also told of the gossip that one of the servants was spreading. Rumors said that she had magical abilities, in which case His Highness's prophetess might have been a higher priority target. And she could also get Sir Millard to constantly guard her and worry about their safety. This somehow surprised Percy and made him unhappy about it. In fact, Leafy wasn't worried about her own life. She had come here to protect Perseolian from danger. After all, The future of her own life and well-being depended on her. Today, it seemed that the prince was used to assassination, and the boy himself had been in similar situations many times before. Perhaps when he was a magician, it really was a small thing. But still, at that moment, Leafy somehow felt grief and fear for her ruler. A strange feeling was arising in the girl's chest, and she could not explain it to herself, but it confused her. The girl said she would sleep next to the prince and hold his hand. She didn't have any bad sleeping habits, but now Percy said he would probably wake her up and save her too. Leafy replied that such a development of events was possible, but when the young ruler felt someone's presence, he could simply squeeze her hand, and the girl would wake up and begin to act accordingly. The prince asked how she knew that he was a very light sleeper. Leafy replied that she had read about it in a book, but now she felt that she could no longer be quiet. Now she realized that this was not just a peculiarity of the tyrant's behavior, but his body's reaction to constant threat and danger. For some reason, it seemed that she would not be able to change him. The ruler asked why the girl had brought a mattress with her. She replied that she would sleep on the floor next to the bed so that they could hold hands. That way, they would be close. In the middle of the night, when Leafy was just starting to fall asleep, the prince called her over. He said that she could lie down next to him because the bed was very large anyway, and there would be enough room for both of them. Leafy replied that she was a girl with the right ideas, to which the prince replied that if she continued to talk nonsense, he would fly out of here as quickly as possible. It was scary to disobey him. Finally, Leafy went to bed. They both lay there with their eyes wide open and silent. The prince said he wouldn't hold her hand. If he sensed danger, he would simply wake her up. But Leafy didn't lag behind. She said that she could hold her ruler's hand like that and easily wake him up or simply help him when he had a nightmare or a terrible dream. The day after the assassination attempt, the prince was receiving visitors with their requests. This had been going on for a very long time, so Percy was very tired and wanted to stop working for the day. Leafy announced that the next visitor was to be Count Massens and his daughter. In fact, all the subsequent guests were with their daughters, who were 4 or 5 years old. The girl found it funny. It had begun a few hours earlier, when the first guest had brought his daughter with him. She had bowed and begun to greet the prince, as befits nobles and aristocrats in such situations. The father said that his daughter had long dreamed of meeting a prince, and now it seemed to him that they could make a very good couple. But Percy himself did not think so. It was too much for him. At the ceremony, the boy showed himself to be intelligent and witty. Many decided to get closer to his tyrant father through his son, and many of the nobles thanked God for their daughter. Leafy had a hard time holding back her laughter the entire time the guests tried to praise their daughters and persuade His Highness to agree to a future wedding. But Count Massens made me think. After all, this man had gone all the way from an ordinary knight at court to the position of commander-in-chief, so he could help the prince with his problem. Until now, no one has been able to identify the person who wanted to kidnap the prince right at the ceremony organized by his grandmother. At that moment, the prince had only 3 guards. Meanwhile, the girl analyzed the day of the assassination attempt. The knight who was supposed to guard the emperor went out into the street. It is not known who he was talking to there, but it was after this that the explosion occurred. The problem then was also the lack of sufficient soldiers. Sir Millard felt uncertain. He hoped that everything would pass, so he relaxed his attention for a moment. It was the events at the ceremony that led Millard to begin training a real bodyguard. To this end, the knight even came up with his own physical endurance test. But Leafy returned to current events. She reported that the count's daughter was turning exactly 5 years old. That might interest the tyrant, but the prince replied that he paid no attention to such things. The prophetess replied that it was not yet known what events awaited the boy in the future, so it was not worth refusing to meet an important and influential count and his daughter. Percy replied that he could not take the girl seriously, because in his case it was complete madness. Leafy said that the girl was older than him. The prince was angry. Finally, the prince could not stand it any longer. He said that the girl was free to go and rest. The prophetess said that she was not tired at all, but now it was time to leave Percy because he was beginning to rage. The boy had said many times today that magic was not omnipotent, and that the wound Leafy had received even with magical means would take a very long time to heal, and the healing process would be lengthy. They were interrupted by the count and his daughter. The man greeted them politely. He and the girl bowed politely and wished the best for the empire and its ruler. Percy reciprocated. From the expression on the Count's girl's face, Leafy concluded that the Count's daughter had fallen in love with the prince. But he replied that he was not interested in such a development of events. The Earl and Daisy were sitting on the sofa, drinking tea and eating sweets. The man apologized for demanding an audience while the prince was still recovering from the attempt on his life. The girl, no matter how hard she tried, did not get the prince's attention. She tried her best to attract the attention of everyone present. The Count paid no attention to this. He simply wanted to talk to Percy. Daisy asked Percy which cookie was tastier. He said it didn't matter to him. But the girl was stubborn. She said she wouldn't eat anything until the prince answered. Finally, Percy couldn't take it anymore. He said that chocolate chip cookies were delicious. Then the girl broke the cookie in half and gave a piece to the prince. The father didn't expect this from his daughter. The boy refused. Silence fell at the table. Everyone felt a little awkward. There was tension in the air. Daisy was actually offended by the prince for having slighted her. Suddenly, she threw a piece of biscuit at His Majesty the Prince. Leafy, at the last moment, managed to put up her hand and protect her lord. The Count tried to say something, but could not because of fear. The prophetess decided to lighten the tension a little. She handed the prince a piece of biscuit and said that it was given to him by Miss Daisy. The father was teaching his daughter at that time that she shouldn't do that. The Count apologized for the girl's behavior because she was very young and sometimes not smart. However, if Percy decided to punish someone, let his anger turn on his father. The prince looked like a little demon. He glared at the guests and told the Count that he should have thought about it before bringing his young daughter to the reception and taught her manners. The man asked for forgiveness for him and his daughter. After all, he really did not think that Daisy was capable of such an act, but the prince's will was firm, like his father's character. So he thought. The Count asked not to inflict a similar punishment, which was inflicted on the Marquise at the ceremony. Percy replied that the Count should atone for his guilt by ordering the aristocrats not to bring children to the reception. The boy broke the piece of cookie into 2 more pieces and said that the same thing would happen to the head of anyone who violated this order as it had happened to the cookie, and nothing could change his will or convince him otherwise. The Count and his daughter quickly left the chambers. He was afraid that the ruler would change his mind. The girl was still looking intently at the ruler, but her father hurried and urged her on. Leafy reminded him that there were a lot of girls chasing Percy today. However, none of them appealed to the boy. He thought the girl had gone crazy. But now it was about Daisy. And although the prince was not used to this, he did not even raise his voice at anyone. This was considered an achievement for him. But Daisy was very difficult because the boy showed attention to her father. Leafy asked if it was because he really liked the girl, but the prince was afraid to admit it to himself. Percy replied that he would be worse than trash in that case. The boy replied that Daisy, because of her age, didn't understand anything, and there was no need to talk about anything serious. But something interested him. He was interested in learning about her character. Most likely, the girl grew up in an atmosphere of respect and love from her father. Therefore, for her, such behavior is completely normal, and she feels impunity and free in her choice. Leafy wondered if the boy might be jealous of the girl because of her childhood. The book didn't say much about the tyrant's childhood. All that was known was that it was similar to Cyril's. And the girl's childhood was very bad. Her mother, Cyril, died very early. The little girl lived with the Duke's family. There she was very much mocked. Even the servants allowed themselves to mock her. The girl was forced to constantly be on the alert to fight back against anyone who tried to mock and ridicule her. The girl's body was constantly covered in bruises and injuries that no one undertook to treat. Later, this manifested itself in the fact that the girl became an excellent fencer, and although she was to become the next head of the clan, she still often remembered and thought about her childhood years. Leafy liked that the prince and his bride had experienced similar emotions about what their childhood years were like, but now the girl felt something strange in her heart about childhood. The prophetess said that the prince was ready to do whatever he wanted. He began to smile. The girl said that the boy could always do as he saw fit. When the little one started to smile, Leafa herself felt pleased. After all, she believed that she was responsible for the tyrant's frequent smiling, and she had also saved many people from his wrath. Finally, they returned to the subject that His Highness had begun to talk about so often. He asked the girl when she would find out what had caused his curse and how to lift it. Percy ordered him to be left alone. In the corridor of the palace, Liffey saw the Count. He asked her to talk. He said that he had forgotten to do something, so now he asked her to give something to Prince Percy. The aristocrat handed her a folder with documents. There were resumes of various knights, aristocrats. The news of the recruitment of guards for the prince spread throughout the prince's possessions and became known to everyone. The count said that he had once been the deputy of a great warrior, so he could personally vouch for each of these knights. But in fact, the archduchess had asked him to hand it over. But that was a secret. The man was sure that the archduchess was very worried about her indirect grandson, and the information provided should help make his environment safer. Leafy thought that the transfer of such materials could indicate the woman's evil intentions towards Percy. After all, at the moment, the Duchess was the main suspect in the assassination attempt. But even more unexpected was the Count's gift to Leaf herself. The man gave her a sapphire necklace. The stone, in the aristocrat's opinion, suited the girl perfectly because of her beautiful eyes. This gift further confirmed that the man was trying to deliver the package to the prince through Leafy herself, although the Count said that he simply fell in love when he saw the girl at the dinner and ball. Leafy promised to give His Highness the documents to the prince, but she did not agree to the bribe because she would consider herself to have done something wrong to Percy. Besides, she did not want him to die. The girl returned to Percy, who had not expected to see her so soon. The girl told him that she had just received a good bribe for her position and being with the prince. Leafy said that the Marquise had asked her to deliver the documents to the prince, and now she was showing the jewelry that had been given to her for it. She also spoke of her fears and suspicions about Diepke. Percy asked his friend if she thought she was a bad person because she took the bribe. She said it would be a crime not to report it, and her conscience was clear now. The prince said that he had studied the names and identities of the people on the list. They were all nobles and aristocrats who were loyal to the archduchess, so Percy would order Millard not to consider their candidacies. Count Massens turned out to be an accomplice of Diepke, so he also falls off the list of close people who can be relied on in the future struggle. The current situation is not so bad. The girl asked if she could keep the bracelet, because her help was needed when she skillfully found out from the Count who had handed over the documents, helping the prince. He said that the girl could keep the bracelet, but would write a written refusal of it. It would not be very good if it turned out that a person close to the prince was taking bribes and kickbacks. Leafy was upset. After all, in her opinion, the prince could not appreciate her deed, and before that, she did not regret her life for the sake of saving him. The miser does not even want to give up the bracelet. There was no point in running away from Percy either. After all, if she ran, they would immediately send Sir Millard after her, who did not treat the enemies of his master and lord very well. Leafy understood the prospect of her constantly working with the prince, so it had to be done, so that he wouldn't be harsh on her. The girl wouldn't be able to stand his nasty temper for long. The girl went into the kitchen. The maid saw her and asked if anything had happened. After all, they were just about to prepare food for their ruler. The girls invited Leafy to join them. The prophetess understood that it was with the help of food that she would be able to tame the prince to her side and make him feel positive towards her. After all, everyone knows that the way to a man lies through his stomach. Leafy asked if she could help the maids. They replied that they would only be glad to have the help and pleasant company of the girl. The emperor's servants loved her very much, and the girl's past, her seemingly precognitive abilities, aroused even greater interest in the girl. After all, everyone was very surprised by how it felt to be able to see the future, but Leafy kept herself modest. The girl asked the servants what they were planning to cook. They replied that they wanted to bake cookies. But recently, His Highness the Prince has not been eating cookies, although he used to like them. Leafy was amused that she knew the reason why the boy didn't eat cookies, but the servant asked if the prince's close friend would tell him about his taste preferences. Leafy advised them to find the woman who had cooked for His Majesty the Emperor as a child and ask her what the young tyrant liked. The tastes of father and son, given their similarities, must be the same. The little emperor spent a lot of time in his childhood in the magic tower, from which he rarely left, so it's hard to follow his taste preferences at such a young age. And the aunt who cooked is old. Leafy also learned that the prince's magical abilities had awakened at the age of 9. Since then, he had not behaved like a child at all. He did not even like sweet tea, preferring adult food. The girl thought that her ward simply could not eat normal food, and not that he did not want to. That is why the young tyrant was so angry all the time, denying himself many things. Will he agree to change his attitude? The maid said that if the son liked the sweets, they could also feed the tyrant with them. After all, in that case, he would be happy too. But what was frightening was that the atmosphere was tense before his departure. Leafy remembered that Millard had also said that the aristocracy had been acting strangely lately. Perhaps the reason was the princess who had left the empire the day before. She was curious about the reasons for her departure. The maidservants tried to assure her that only Leafy herself, who was close to the young lord and his main protector and assistant, could feed the young heir. Leafy replied that she would do her best to feed his highness and make him feel much better than he was before. She would also start cooking for him herself. The girl finally took the prepared sweets and brought them to the office where the young prince worked. Leafy looked very happy. For some reason, this greatly excited and alarmed Percy. The prophetess said that it was the most delicious dessert, prepared by the best chefs of the imperial court, and the sweets were prepared taking into account all the preferences of His Highness the Emperor. The boy asked why the assistant had brought all this to him. He suspected that the girl had planted poison there and was trying to lead him to his grave in this way. He wondered if Deepki had lured her. The poor thing was forced to taste the food she had brought herself. She couldn't believe that the little guy was so suspicious and distrustful of the people around him, so she had to show her loyalty. Leafy added that everyone around was worried about the young ruler's condition, but Percy replied that he didn't really believe that. People were just doing their jobs. The girl had asked to attend the meals anyway. The prophetess reported that the girls in the kitchen tried to prepare sweets according to the boy's preferences and size. So one might as well at least try the delicacy out of politeness and respect for one's servants. Leafy tried to explain that true love involves being attentive to the little things that another person likes. The courtiers actually love Percy and want the best for him. But the boy's reaction was as if he couldn't accept human kindness at all. And when it comes to trust and love, he generally acts foolish and loses control of himself. The girl tried to convince Percy that if he ate poorly, he wouldn't grow, but now she realized that she had stepped onto a very treacherous path. But it's better to keep quiet now and just help Percy with the papers. But when the girl returned, she noticed out of the corner of her eye how Percy was eating sweets. Leafy was afraid to return, because she knew that then he would stop eating and become sullen and unfriendly towards her again. In general, the little one was trying to give the impression of an adult now. But something happened to his curse, and therefore he cannot instantly return to the state he was in before the transformation and transformation. Leafy thought that now she felt as if she had managed to make a stray cat happy. It was nice, but she couldn't show it to the prince himself. Otherwise, he would shut himself up for a long time and would never trust her again. A few days later, the girl was forced to part with the bracelet. Percy assured her that he would keep the list of people, but would return the jewelry to the count. It was impossible for anyone to think about corruption in the emperor's circle. Leafy was not upset. After all, the prince had said that if she refused to return it, she would say goodbye not only to the sapphire, but also to her head. Lately, the prophetess had been walking around the palace with the map more often. The girl was looking for the cursed object, but at the same time, her fears became reality. The estate was much larger than she had imagined. It would take several hours to just walk through it. One day, during a walk, a servant informed him that Viscount Helenos wanted to meet the prince's assistant, so he invited her to dinner, but the reason was that he wanted to introduce her to his son. It was very similar to the situation when all the nobles started coming to visit the prince with their daughters. After the invitation, a marriage proposal could follow. But after the last time, Leafy refused. She was afraid that Percy would think about it. After all, last time he accused her of bribery, and therefore she refuses any contacts outside the palace and in the palace of His Highness. Life is dear to her. Recently, many nobles have been wanting to meet her. At the ceremony, the prince showed his unwavering character. Since then, everyone around has been targeting his assistant and guardian, who can influence him. It was this girl who brought the prince to the palace and from then on was constantly by his side, even when he was deciding matters and receiving guests. And this meant that they had been on good terms with each other for a long time. Aristocrats and nobles believed that if they could capture the girl's attention, they would be able to influence His Highness the Prince. The girl tried to ignore the letters and appeals, but lately it had become unbearable. But Leafy constantly informed His Highness about all attempts to establish contact with her. He took the information seriously, but when the assistant told her about the marriage proposal, the little one laughed. The prince said that gossip about her and her suitors had been circulating around the palace for a long time, although no one had ever seen her with men or young men, but she had to report all such things to him personally. At this point, Leafy should have completely rejected the offer, but after a moment the boy became angry and asked if she really wanted to meet someone. Leafy was quick to assure her that she absolutely did not. The assistant noticed that even in the body of a child, the tyrant had a threatening appearance. It is scary to even imagine how formidable he was in an adult body. It was as if she did not want to meet him or be left alone.